Welcome to The Explainer. Now, I want you to just imagine for a second that we're stepping aboard a small boat together. We're pulling away from a rocky, windswept shoreline into waters that are literally darker than the night sky. I've lived near these shores my entire life, and I'm going to be your local guide today as we navigate one of the most famous and absolutely most debated bodies of water on the entire planet. We are heading deep into the Scottish Highlands to unravel a legend that has captivated the globe for decades. But look, we aren't just out here hunting for monsters today. We are exploring the fascinating, messy intersection of extreme landscapes, modern science, and our incredibly rich Scottish cultural folklore.
So, seriously, what is actually hiding beneath 230 meters of dark Scottish water? It's a question that has generated over 1,100 official sightings, countless expensive expeditions, and I don't even know how many global headlines. Is it some kind of prehistoric survivor that time forgot? A trick of the light? Or something else entirely? Today, we're going to break down the ancient origins of the myth, the extreme physical realities of our unique environment out here, and the latest scientific surveys that are trying to solve this mystery once and for all.
Okay, let's dive into this. Act 1. The mythic origins.
To really get this place, we actually have to start our journey not with modern science, but with the old Highland folklore my grandparents used to tell me. Way before camera phones and sonar, the people living around here told stories just to make sense of this massive, frankly imposing landscape. According to local legend, Loch Ness was actually created in a literal fit of rage. The story goes that the Celtic winter queen, the goddess Darkbera, had a maid named Nessa. When Nessa was late to her duties one day, the goddess furiously transformed her into a river. Nessa fled, desperately trying to escape the confines of her new watery form, and as she stretched out across the landscape, she formed the massive, deep waters of Loch Ness. It's a beautifully tragic story, right? But it shows us that from the very beginning, this specific loch was viewed as a place born of volatile, magical forces.
Now, if you look at the history, you can clearly see how encounters with the water evolved over the centuries. The very first written record comes from way back in 565 AD, when St. Columba is said to have driven a beast right back into the River Ness. Fast forward to the early 1800s, and Scottish folklore was deeply rooted in the idea of the water kelpie, or the each-weesh. This was a deadly, shape-shifting water horse that lured people into the deep. There's a really famous local tale about a man named James MacGregor who stumbled upon a kelpie on the shores. Knowing exactly what this magical beast was, MacGregor whips out his great claymore sword, completely cuts off the creature's bridle, strips it of its power, and essentially saves the locals from vanishing into the loch. But notice how the whole narrative suddenly shifts in 1933. As cars and modern tourism arrive in the Highlands, a couple report seeing a dragon or prehistoric monster crossing the road. Suddenly, it's all over the newspapers, and by 1934, that iconic photograph showing a long neck and small head goes totally viral worldwide. Though, actually, scratch that, we now know definitively that the 1934 photo was a complete hoax.
This contrast right here reveals so much about human psychology. The water itself didn't change one bit, but our cultural stories absolutely did. In ancient times, the terrifying thing in the water was a shape-shifting magical horse, which perfectly aligned with local superstitions at the time. Then, in the 20th century, following the global frenzy over dinosaur fossils, the monster suddenly morphed into a prehistoric plesiosaur. It's wild to think about, but our cultural expectations quite literally shaped what people thought they were seeing out there in the water.
And listen, we absolutely cannot forget the setting that feeds this whole atmosphere. Whenever I look out at the majestic ruins of Urquhart Castle just standing guard over the water, it honestly sends a shiver down my spine. Just imagine it. Those ancient forests, cloud-kissed mountains under soaring skies, and fiery sunsets reflecting off an endless expanse of dark ripples. This isn't just some local pond. It's an imposing, deeply atmospheric environment that practically demands a mystery.
Which brings us to Act 2, the perfect hideout. Let's step away from the myths for a second and look at the sheer physical reality of this place. If you were a massive, unknown creature, could you possibly ask for a better lair? We are talking about a staggering 230 meters deep. That is 754 feet straight down. This landscape was carved out by brutal glaciers during the last ice age, following the line of the 380-million-year-old Great Glen Fault. It's essentially a massive natural trench right across Scotland. It is so impossibly deep that you could take London's Millennium Wheel, drop it in its deepest point just north of Urquhart Bay, and submerge it entirely, nearly twice over.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how massive the scale is here. Loch Ness stretches for 23 miles, and thanks to those incredible plunging depths we just talked about, it holds the largest volume of fresh water in the entire UK. It literally holds more water than every single lake in England and Wales combined. To put that into an even crazier perspective, there's enough water in Loch Ness to completely submerge every single human being on the planet, not just once, but more than 3 times over. So if you're ever wondering if there's enough room for something to hide down there, yeah, the answer is a resounding yes.
But it's not just how deep it is, it's the absolute darkness. You see, Loch Ness is heavily stained by peat washed down from the surrounding Highland hills. What this means is that underwater visibility is severely reduced right near the surface. Drop down just 9 meters, which is less than 30 feet, and visibility drops to absolute zero. Pitch black. You could have a literal submarine passing just feet away from you down there, and you would never even know. This extreme environment makes it incredibly difficult to search, especially when you're trying to bounce sonar around in deep, peat-stained water. Every splash starts to look like a monster.
Because of this extreme environment, the loch literally plays tricks on your eyes. Back in the 1960s, scientists really started investigating the loch and realized something absolutely crucial. Only the very top layer of the water warms and cools. The deep water below, it stays at a constant, freezing 5.5 degrees Celsius all year round. So in calm weather, this temperature difference creates incredibly powerful mirages that make small objects look enormous. So those multi-humped serpents people kept seeing. Turns out, they were often just undulating boat wakes bouncing off the steep sides of the loch. And that classic long-necked beast? A lot of the time, it's just a water bird, a seal, swimming deer, or even a floating log heavily distorted by a mirage.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is a totally incredible natural phenomenon at play here called internal seiches. Because the loch has that warmer top layer resting on a dense, cold layer beneath, strong surface winds can actually push that top water all the way to one end. When the wind stops and it swings back, it creates these massive waves completely underwater. These internal seiches are super common in Loch Ness, and they are powerful enough to carry floating objects, like massive logs, against the surface wind. Imagine standing on the shore, right? You're watching a dark shape slicing through the water in the exact opposite direction of the wind. Your brain instantly screams, "Animal!" But the physical reality is just complex hydrodynamics.
All right, let's move into Act 3, the modern hunt.
So, with all those optical illusions and local myths muddying the waters, scientists realized they just couldn't trust their eyes anymore. They had to look deeper. They brought in the tech. Starting in the 1980s, we saw major sonar sweeps of the entire loch. In 1981, a sonar search vessel recorded 40 significant unexplained contacts. Then in 1987, Operation Deep Scan lined up a literal fleet of 20 boats to sweep the loch side by side using sonar. And again, strong unexplained echoes were reported. And hey, this isn't just old news. Recently, the Cruise Loch Ness boat recorded large sonar contacts right near the bottom of the loch that were 5 or 6 meters long. Guys, that is the size of a Ford Transit van, just moving around down there in the pitch black. While some pings are definitely methane gas bubbles or seals, these massive, deep contacts remain entirely unexplained.
Since visual and sonar evidence always seem to leave some wiggle room, a team from the University of the Highlands and Islands and the University of Otago brought in the heavy biological artillery in 2018. They utilized environmental DNA, or eDNA. Simply put, as creatures swim through the water, they leave behind tiny traces of genetic material, stuff like scales, skin, or waste. By pulling water samples from all over the loch, scientists could sequence the DNA and essentially take a giant register of every single living thing in Loch Ness without ever actually having to see them. The results of this 2018 study, absolutely wild. First off, they found 0 DNA from a plesiosaur or any giant prehistoric reptile. So that theory is officially dead in the water. What they did find was an overwhelming, massive amount of eel DNA in almost every single sector of the loch. But what's truly astonishing, the real kicker here, is that around 25% of the DNA samples collected remain completely unidentified. A quarter of the biological material swimming around in that loch doesn't perfectly match our current scientific databases. No way.
This complex reality is best summed up by a brilliant local naturalist named Adrian Shine from the Loch Ness Project, who has studied this water for over 50 years. He completely nailed it when he said, "To understand it and to make sense of the mystery, you must do more than just look at the loch. You must discover what you can't see by looking at the surface." Science has basically forced us to stop looking for dragons and start looking at the actual incredible ecosystem we have here.
So the crucial point is, based on the extreme environment and the actual data, what do the experts think Nessie might genuinely be? Well, they've narrowed it down to 3 biologically plausible suspects. First, the migratory sturgeon. This is a massive, incredibly ancient-looking fish that might occasionally wander into the loch from the sea to mate. Second, the Wells catfish. These were introduced to the UK in the 1900s. They can grow to monstrous sizes, and they live a very long time.
though honestly, the water's a bit too cold for them to breed. And third, heavily backed by that eDNA study we talked about, the giant eunuch eel. Basically, an eel that never returns to the sea to breed might just stay in the loch indefinitely and grow to an unusually massive size.
You know, even the most dedicated monster hunters agree the myth has evolved. Take my mate, Steve Feltham, for example. He has lived right on Doris Beach out of a converted mobile library van for over 25 years. He actually holds the world record for the longest continuous vigil looking for the monster. He openly admits that when he started way back in 1991, he was absolutely looking for a dinosaur. Now, he says, the jury is out, but I'd suggest the whale's catfish, but we really don't know. But he also points right back to those recent transit van-sized sonar contacts as undeniable proof that something very, very big is still down there.
Let's move to and see how this builds up to our conclusion. When you put all these pieces together, the picture becomes so clear. Loch Ness is a place where absolute vastness meets pitch-black waters, where intense natural phenomena create mind-bending mirages, and where 25% of the DNA is still a complete mystery to science. Whether Nessie is an oversized eel, a stray sturgeon, or just the ghost of an ancient Celtic water kelpie kept alive by our imaginations, the loch holds its secrets incredibly tightly. So I'll leave you with this thought. If you ever come visit us and stand on these rocky shores staring out over that freezing dark water, will you be the lucky one to report the next sighting? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes peeled.